the Child and Nature Alliance of Canada is headquartered on the unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe in what is a place now commonly known as Ottawa, Ontario. Our organization is currently led by white settlers, and we have imposed a settler colonial way of being with the land because our programs were not co-created with Indigenous people. We are committed to repairing our relationship with Indigenous communities by dismantling harmful practices, changing the way we operate, and co-creating programs. And of course, the land itself is at the heart of everything that we do at CNAC. So I would like to personally thank this land that I am on, which again is the unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe. And I just want to thank the land and the Algonquin for giving my family and I a place to live, play, laugh, and learn. My name is Marc St. Dennis. I am the project lead for Forest School Canada. I've been working with Child and Nature Alliance for about a year now almost, and it's my great pleasure to be sort of helping out with this 3-year community consultation project that we are engaging on as a community of practice. I will just pass this off to my co-host, Natalia, to introduce herself and a little bit about the project itself.
Hi, everyone. I'm noticing some familiar names. I am the program coordinator here at CNAC, and my role is essentially organizing, planning, and doing the logistics of the professional learning opportunities that we offer through the Forest School program. I thought maybe I would share today some ways that I've been playing this past year, given that this session is around relationship with play. So there's a park across my street, and I've grown to really connect with this one particular tree kind of in the middle of the park, and it's been really beautiful to watch it change throughout the seasons and this past year. So in the summer, I would kind of lie underneath, look at the really bright green leaves, and then watch the clouds as they kind of floated by, and picked out different shapes and images that I saw. In the fall, made lots of leaf piles to jump in, and kind of drew some images with the fallen leaves. And then this past winter, I've gone out to toss some snowballs, create some snow structures. And yeah, I'm really excited to learn about your relationship with play. I'll kind of go over a little bit about the community consultation project before we jump in. So today's Fireside Chat is part of a 3-year community consultation project that we're undertaking with the support of the Lawson Foundation. And the goal of this project is to meet with Forest and Nature School practitioners so that we can articulate as a community what a quality forest and nature school in Canada looks like, sounds like, feels like. Improve our professional learning courses, and also set the stage for representing the forest and nature school sector in discussions around policy and systems change. So this project is kind of, we've decided to undertake it right now because there's kind of been an influx of interest in and attention on the forest and nature school approach in Canada. And we've heard from many of you that we need to set some indicators for quality forest and nature school practice. And we've heard that folks are looking to CNAC for a higher level of leadership and a national voice to kind of represent the sector. Our kind of main hope with this project is that it'll position us to do just that, and that you, our community of practice, will walk along with us, so that all of the outcomes from this project are truly representative of your needs and your aspirations.
Thanks, Natalia. Yeah, I really like the story about play. That's a good prompt. Maybe I'll quickly share too. I'm lucky enough to live in a on a cul-de-sac, and so during the winter, the snowplows they come by and they make this giant pile of snow right in the middle of the street, and so my kids have been outside every day lately, just sliding around on the hill, digging holes and playing with it, and the neighborhood kids come out too, and I go out with my dog and we go to the top of the hill. And just fun all around, all the different adventures you can get up to with just the simplicity of a big snow pile. So this Fireside Chat series is a virtual space for Forest Nature School practitioners to meet and share experiences and answer questions related to a specific theme. Last month, some of you may have actually been in attendance. We had our first Fireside Chat that was in relation to land. And so today we are diving into our second theme, which is relationship with play. And these are based on 4 principles of forest and nature school practice that were developed in 2018. And we're going to look at those principles and then think about how they relate to our relationship with play. So what we want to learn from you is how these principles or what these principles look like on the ground, and specifically how we can measure these principles and what the measurements actually are, and how do we know that a forest and nature school program is meeting these principles. And then uh, probably just as importantly, if not more so, is anything missing? So our hope today is to have a lively discussion about quality practice in forest and nature school. Just so you all are aware, the Child Nature Alliance of Canada is not here to judge anyone's practice or be critical. We simply want to learn from you so that we know how to best support you in your endeavors. And I hope you can also see that we're all very passionate about what we do in the forest and nature school sector. And I imagine there's likely many differences between us and what we value as essential, which is actually the reason why we're having this conversation. And so it's so that we can find what is common and shared while still preserving what makes our practices unique. So let's remember to be respectful and kind if and when disagreements arise. For today's session, what we're going to do is a little bit different than last time. We are actually going to jump right into breakout rooms for each of the 4 principles of practice that we will be discussing. So we will have 4 breakout rooms throughout this session. We hope that we can have some interesting conversations. There will be, of course, be prompts, and the rooms will be facilitated. And after each breakout room, we'll come back as a one large group and we'll do some sharing of reporting back of what we talked about. But you don't have to worry about doing that yourselves. Your breakout room leads will take the lead on sharing what was spoken about.
Thanks, Mark. So before jumping into the first breakout room, just some housekeeping things. If you have any questions or thoughts that come out of this after our chat, please feel welcome to share them in whatever way feels best for you, whether it's video, audio, or written. And you can send them to community@childnature.ca. I think Heather's just popped that in the chat there. And then you can also complete the survey for this session, which will be linked in the chat and also available on our website on the Community Consultation Project page.
Thank you, Natalia. So yeah, we're gonna jump right into our first breakout room, and we are going to discuss principle number 5 of Forest and Nature School practice, which is Forest and Nature School values children's play, which is self-directed, freely chosen, intrinsically motivated in and of itself. Forest and Nature School programs provide adequate time and space for children and youth to dive deeply into their play. So we're looking at that principle, and the questions we're going to ask, and you will have these available to you in the breakout room as a floating text is, what is unique about play at a forest and nature school in Canada? And does it differ from play elsewhere? And then the other question we're asking is, who might be excluded from this understanding of play? So like I said, you each have, you'll be broken up into breakout rooms. There will be a facilitated leader for each of those rooms. And after the breakout, we'll come back, share some of our conversations. And yeah, we'll go from there. So the breakout rooms will last for about 15 minutes. So Charlene, whenever you're ready to throw us into the void, go ahead. Welcome back, everyone. I'm not sure about you, but I always feel like these breakout rooms, there's never enough time to really dive into it, such as it is. But this is only the introduction of us being able to speak with each other. There's going to be many more opportunities to dive even deeper into these questions. And if you do have more that you feel like you haven't had a chance to share, feel free to use the survey that we've put in the chat. That's also available on our website. Although I think now I am taking up Natalia's time, so I will pass it over to you, Natalia.
Not at all. Yeah, I'm really interested to hear what other groups chatted about. Am I able to call in Caitlin to share what the conversation was like in the group?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think there's a few different things that came up, and as always, I mean, yeah, we could spend like hours talking about this. But a couple of things that were said were time and space. So really, what is unique about play in the forest is creating more time and more space for open-ended play, and kind of moving back on some of the restrictions that sometimes are placed on play. Also just that there's been this like kind of observation that the loose parts that are just in the forest that are naturally there can really open up play in really wonderful ways. And along with that is the lack of like specific, I don't know, toys that you might have indoors, also opens up free play in really cool ways. When we were also having a conversation about like who might be excluded from this understanding of play, and that was kind of location specific. So some people noting that being connected to formal like kind of educational programs, so programs in schools, there's a few more restrictions. So other teachers might not really understand this learning through play pedagogical approach. Administrators may not really understand it, especially in terms of playing outside, that sometimes playing outside is seen as like you just do it so that they can blow off steam and get some energy out. It's not necessarily seen as a valuable part of learning. So those were, yeah, some quick kind of notes of what we said. If anyone in my group, if I have forgotten anything, you can type them in the chat too.
Thanks, Caitlin. Yeah, we discussed some similar themes in our group. Cameron, would you like to share what was discussed in your group?
Yeah, sure. I mean, we had a great discussion. It not only just got cut, I felt it went by too soon. I think they have prematurely cut it off there right at the end there on my ends, but I don't know. Anyways, it was vibrant. So we actually had a chance. We sort of ended up getting the first, I guess you could say that the second question as well. I mean, some of the things that we felt were unique about this kind of play was the fact is that it's a lot less controlled. It's a lot less about it's more about letting kids figure it out. It's allowing them to take some risks, so it's a bit more about risky play. It's child-led. That's the other thing. And one of the themes that was talked about among our group was the idea that really the adults getting out of the way. That's one of the bigger things. There was a little bit of a discussion around whether those educators, particularly ECEs, are prepared enough for that, trained enough for allowing that play to take place. That's open, but that was definitely one of the things. One of the quotes that I really liked was this idea, and it was I forgive me, I didn't write down the person who had said it. It was a quote of a quote, someone quoting a quote. but it's the idea about being on tap, not on top. So the idea is being there as a practitioner, being ready, but not necessarily being on top of kids like in a more traditional setting. So those were some of the big ones that I think that we talked about that really made things quite distinct.
Thanks so much, Cameron. I am hearing so many things from these discussions, and I wish I could be a fly on the wall for all of the breakout rooms. So now we're going to jump into our second breakout room. And so this one is where we'll get to explore principle number 7 of Forest Nature School, which is that Forest Nature School relies on loose natural materials to support open-ended creative play and learning. So some of the things we want to know from your discussions is play with loose parts an essential element of Forest and Nature School in Canada? And how do you use loose parts in your own programming? So I think Charlene will send us off back into our breakout rooms now.
So that was great conversations about loose parts. It was kind of fascinating to me to hear from my group. But maybe I will, instead of sharing what I heard, I will call on some other folks to share. So Heather, in your group, what were some highlights?
Yeah, I'll have to be quite careful not to talk for too long, because this is a part of this work that I find really inspiring, and I always learn so much about what other people are doing. It's fascinating. Yeah, so we started kind of talking about the age groups of children, and usually it's younger age groups that play with the loose parts, and the older children are perhaps, as the younger children play alongside each other with the loose parts, and there's some exchange there. But older children are perhaps more socially focused, so it's the loose parts are less of a focus for those children. An interesting piece too was what the experience of the child is coming into a forest school program. If they've been regularly part of a more structured or directed program, then the approach to loose parts looks different, and there's perhaps some unlearning to do there with those children, and working with them so they're inspired by, and the question surfaces, what are these for, or what do I do with these? So to kind of tap into the child's creativity. Yeah, I learned lots about what people are using for loose parts. Shells and corks and tree cookies, and snow came up as a loose part, Marc, to reflect back to your story with your children in your neighborhood. And also what I loved, noticing the texture of the snow as a loose part. That's something that hadn't come up for me before. That loose parts were helpful in large group contexts, and also another tactic I learned in conversation with the group I was part of is to introduce just one loose part at a time as a way to help manage conflict. I thought that was super smart. And that also helps to kind of reduce any stress that might be present in the play. Yeah, lots, and then really lots that surface. One more thing, that to keep favorite loose parts, you know, and bring those out at a time where the play, there may be a lull in the play or a lull in the kind of mood of the children, depending on what's going on that day too, I thought was great. And sorry, I did say that was my last thing, but one more thing, because I thought this hadn't come up for me for a while, and it's worth repeating, I think, that sometimes loose parts aren't used because it can restrict movement in the day, particularly, you know, in the winter times. And so they're sometimes not used as regularly in a program, because if you want to move from place to place, loose parts don't really allow for that to happen. So I thought that was an interesting point too.
Thank you, Heather. So much in 15 minutes. Steph, what was some highlights from your group?
Yeah, so my group also felt that loose parts were an extremely essential element of forest school in Canada, and that by just being outside, there are loose parts everywhere. So if you're running a program in nature, there are loose parts, even if you don't bring in external ones. And that it almost defines forest school, and because you're not using toys that are produced with a certain outcome in mind, and that, you know, kids will always find something to play with. And yeah, kind of thinking about, you know, you can bring loose parts anywhere. So you could potentially run forest school in an abandoned parking lot, which kind of goes back to the first fireside chat in like where it can take place. Yeah, we talked about how in some programs it takes children a while to get comfortable, but there's always loose parts for them to sort of fiddle with, or hold on to. Oh, here's a rock I can hold on to. And then when they get more comfortable and they start, you know, making friends and whatnot, they'll start collaborating on bigger projects, and, you know, they'll create a tiny society, and they'll be cooking with loose parts and whatnot. Yeah, we also talked about how once kids get used to the idea of loose parts, it's almost like their creativity changes, and it must in a way change the way like their and everyone's brain works. Michelle shared a story of grandparents being concerned that there were no toys to play with. Like, you know, the grandkids were coming over, but there were no toys to play with. And the parents were like, they're going to be fine, because now that they're in forest school, they can play for hours with a salt shaker. So, yeah. So, what else? Also, like seeing how, you know, even if kids are like building, you know, a roadway or something, and there are no play toy cars or no car toys to play with, they will use rocks, or they'll use sticks, or they'll make a car. And yeah, talked a bit about like how you use them in programs, and everyone seemed to agree that usually at the beginning of programs you sort of lay them out as like a, you know, a provocation or whatnot, and then you might offer some suggestions on what they could use them for, and then once they sort of get, oh, I can just do what I want with these, they start to, that's when their creativity explodes, and they'll take, you know, they'll manipulate the loose parts in whatever way they want. So yeah, I have a lot, but I'll stop there.
Thank you, Steph. Yeah, it's interesting to hear the kind of like a common thread, at least with my group too, about the relation between agency and like the child's agency to choose how they want to play, and having the loose parts sort of prompting that and encouraging it, rather than being prescribed the type of play, which might differ from some other programs that are not forest schools. So the next breakout room we're going to jump into is for a principle of practice that we are weaving through all of our fireside chats, because we believe it is an important consideration for all aspects of a forest school, given that we operate on Indigenous land. So this is principle number 9 of a forest nature school, and it is that we prioritize building reciprocal relationships with First Nations, Métis, and Inuit who have been learning from this land since time immemorial. And the question that we have is, what does play have to do with building a reciprocal relationship with First Nations, Métis, and Inuit? So really interested to see what responses come from this.
Welcome back, everyone. We were having a great discussion and cut off. It never seems like enough time. Marc, can I call on you to share what you're chatting about in your group?
Yes, absolutely. We also had a really interesting conversation. It's always, I love these conversations because they always tend to go places that I never really foresaw, which is enjoyable to me. So there were a couple themes that we touched on, and I won't take up too much time. I'll try and go over them quickly. The first, I mean, we're discussing like what play has to do with building reciprocal relationships with Indigenous communities. And we talked how sometimes just knowing the true history of the land, not just the settler history, but the true history of the land, can actually influence the type of play that a child might choose to engage in. So instead of knowing about like just the settler perspective of the location, knowing that if there's a Indigenous person shares with the children directly or through the program that there is a certain history to this spot in particular, the kids might treat it differently. Another thing that came up too was inviting Indigenous people and folks to actually be present, but not in like the way of trying to like tokenize, but more in the sense of like the Indigenous people are there and they're actually playing with the kids. And as they're playing, the Indigenous person might share some of the language of the land. We talked about in our last Fireside Chat how language and land are very much intertwined. And so the kids then choosing to use some of that language while they play. And then finally, the kids through their play are learning about the values of reciprocity, whether that's like reciprocity with the forest. So giving some bird seed to the birds and saying, thank you for letting us play here today. But through learning the values of reciprocity, they're able to then, as they move on in their journey through life, be able to build those reciprocal relationships because they've learned those values in forest school.
Thanks so much, Marc. Similar things coming up for us too. Jason.
Hi, everyone. I would say the same, similar things to what Marc was saying came up in our conversations. I think on a sort of basic level, the reciprocal relationship to land itself does a lot to sort of demonstrate and honor the reciprocal relationships we can have with Indigenous culture and history, and ensuring that, you know, in the work that you do in forest and school programming, that there is storytelling, there is gratefulness, there's thankfulness, that these narratives are being discussed and talked about, and recognizing at the same time that it's not white people's story to tell. In fact, that having those meaningful connections to elders, to other representatives in the community, to visit the schools and to engage in the way that Marc described is very important. And I have to be careful about cultural appropriation and telling stories on behalf instead, and ensuring that those stories are told by elders and by others in the community. And a lot of discussion just in general about the reciprocal nature to land, as I already mentioned, that the play base that happens kind of gets sparked. I think it's what Marc already said, that the narratives and the stories that they learn just naturally begin to reveal themselves in play. And I think that's when when you know it's kind of working, is when you're seeing those metaphors and those narratives popping up in their play in interesting ways in what the children do. So I think I'll stop there. I think that sort of covers what we talked about.
Thanks so much, Jason. So now we'll head into our last breakout room. And so we're gonna dive into principle number 10, which says that Forest Nature School practices, policies, programming reflect and prioritize the building of engaged, healthy, vibrant, and diverse communities through consideration of access and equity in our decisions and actions. So some prompting questions would be, how can and or does the Forest and Nature School sector in Canada support accessible and equitable play for all children?
Welcome back, everyone. Just bear with me as I rearrange my 5,000 tabs that I have open to in order to facilitate this event. Just give me 1 second. Yes, that was really interesting conversations about access and equity. It's you know, an issue that we're aware of in the Forest and Nature School sector. So maybe we'll hear from a couple of the folks that led their breakout rooms. Natalia, can we hear from you about what your group talked about?
Yeah, for sure. I'm sort of still gathering my thoughts. But one thing that we talked a bit about was kind of this question, and maybe a bit of tension in most of programming being privately offered. And so one way that many programs are kind of being able to offer that programming is to connect with schools and other community organizations to support educators in feeling more equipped in like a public school setting to engage in the pedagogy and support nature-based play in schools. Something else that we chatted about was having like an extra stack of mittens, hats, comfy clothes for different weather conditions, as well as having like extra snacks or cookouts at the site for children and families who may not have stable access to food. And we actually talked a lot about how COVID has largely disrupted that access to food for many families. And so that's something that many program leads have been keeping in mind. Also talked about kind of engaging with the community that you'll be working in to better understand their needs. Someone in our group chatted about how the programming kind of rotates around different communities. And so taking the time to build those relationships and learn a little bit more about the community is really helpful in ensuring that the programming is meeting needs. And then we also talked a lot about funding to support families to access programming, as well as for educators who are looking to shift into the like a practitioner's course. Yeah, I think I'll stop there.
Thank you, Natalia. Yeah, it's an incredibly important topic, and I think it was reflected in the chat box as well that, you know, this is something that we really need to dig into. So I hear you on that. Cameron, perhaps you can share some of what was discussed in your breakout room.
Sure. We did mention that there's a number of different pathways sort of to equity and access, and we didn't land on anything specific in the sense of a definitive, which I think is probably a good a good sign. One of the things that was mentioned was the idea of making sure that there's been an increase, particularly through CNAC's involvement in terms of making sure there's things in French and English, making sure that that area of access is addressed. There was a lot of discussion also around this idea of sort of that line, or not sure a line, a place between outdoor education and a forest and nature school. and what those things are, and partly because in terms of what it means in terms of access, because some people had ready like physical proximity to forced or like outdoor spaces. Others need to be bussed in. And so what does that actually mean? And we did get into a little bit of the discussion as to, how much can you do some forest nature programming in areas that are not, that are outdoors, have the forest nature school part there, but also creating it so it makes it accessible to those people who are not able to go to travel. And then I guess one of the other points, there's a few other ones, but one of the other ones that did come up there was how to negotiate the matter of private versus public. And almost a twist on that was even the idea of saying, well, what happens if we wanted to do something like in a park, where the idea of doing something, one of the members of the group was talking about a case where just trying to do something in a local park was difficult because they wasn't even sure how to do the insurance. Like, for an insurance, it wasn't a daycare, it's not something else. So how do you actually provide insurance to that? Allowing something to create access for people in places where forest nature school isn't prominent or available, and yet the logistical and legal requirements for some practitioners is a barrier.
Thank you, Cameron, and thank you to everyone. I could go on about this, I'm sure, but I recognize that we have reached 4:30, and folks probably have other things they would like to be doing as well throughout their days. So I just want to quickly thank everyone for participating today. We really appreciate your input, and everything that was shared today. Notes were taken. We will be bringing those back and looking at them as part of our efforts to co-create quality indicators for forest and nature school practice. And if there was things that you felt like you weren't able to say or didn't feel comfortable saying and would like to have a different method, we also have our 2 online surveys. There's one in English and one in French that are available. I think Heather will drop the links again in the chat. And also for those who are interested or would like to share it around, this video was recorded and we will be putting it up online. We'll put it on social media so you'll be notified when it gets posted, and we'll try and email it out to everyone who registered too. The next Fireside Chat will take place on March 31st at 7:00 p.m. Eastern, and it's going to be on relationship with risky play, which I think folks here might know there's a bit of a nuanced difference between play and risky play. In the meantime, if you ever want to get in touch, we have our new email address that is community@childnature.ca. And finally, our comms person who's been helping us in the background, managing all of the breakout rooms, thank you, Charlene, has asked for a photo for social media. So if you are comfortable with that, if you want to hang around for maybe just a minute or two, and we can pop our cameras on and take a quick photo. For everyone else who, thank you so much for participating, and we'll hopefully see you at the next one. Bye, everyone.